This video is all about what you need to know for the Salesforce admin exam. I spent the past 3 months leading students through a comprehensive Salesforce admin training plan, and I thought it would be beneficial to put together a 1-hour crash course on this same content. The official learning path on Trailhead will take you over 60 hours to work through, but I do recommend spending the time on that if you can. In this video, I am going to summarize some of what you need to know from that trail mix so that you have a solid foundation as you start your Salesforce admin journey, or so that you can have a quick, comprehensive review right before taking the exam. Either way, you will need to study for this exam because it is a tricky one, and if you stick around until the end, I will give you some great tips on how to pass the exam. I will organize the content into the same 7 sections that Salesforce does. Feel free to use the chapters in the description below to jump around as you see fit, or for further review right before you take your exam. We will start with the configuration and setup section, go all the way through each section after that, and then end with the process automation section. Alright, listen up. You want to know this. At the end of each of these sections, I will also provide bonus tips for the exam. Then at the very end, I'll give you my study guide and exam tips. You don't want to miss that. Okay, let's dive in. Configuration and setup makes up 20% of the exam. This is one of the largest sections, so make sure that you feel comfortable with the content in this section. You can expect about 12 questions on the exam that deal with configuration and setup. As a Salesforce admin, much of your time will be spent in the setup menu. Thus, it is important to know what you can find and configure in setup. In order to get to the setup menu while logged into Salesforce, click on the gear icon in the upper right, and then click on Setup. If you do not currently have access to Salesforce, you can create a Developer Edition org for free, which just takes a few minutes. I'll link to a video here to walk you through that so that you can follow along with this video and prepare for the exam. Welcome to the Setup menu. All of these setup pages are accessible in the left-hand panel, which groups certain features and tools into expandable sections. There is a search bar to find things quickly as well. Let's begin by talking about the Company Settings section, which is one of the first places you should go to set up a new Salesforce org. Some of the setup pages in this section that you should pay attention to are company information, business hours, holidays, fiscal year, and language settings. On the company information page, we can view and edit basic org information like the organization name and primary contact for the org, but we can also adjust some more important settings, such as the default locale, the default language, and the default time zone. Each user can have their own locale, language, and time zone settings, which we'll see here in a minute, but this is where you set the defaults for the org. On the company information page, we can also select the default currency and whether or not we want to enable multiple currencies. And finally, we can view some usage and limits, such as the amount of data storage we used compared to the limit, the amount of file storage we've used compared to the limit, the number of Salesforce licenses we have and how many are left, and some other usage-based entitlements like the number of API calls per month. The business hours setup page allows us to set our organization business hours. We can set a specific time range for each day of the week, and we can even create multiple sets of business hours if we have different teams in different locations. Setting up business hours can be helpful with Service Cloud case handling. The holidays setup page allows us to create holidays that our organization observes. These are dates where the business hours will be suspended and are used in conjunction with the business hours we set up to show when the support team is available. The fiscal year setup page allows us to define when the year begins and ends for the business. Using the standard fiscal year functionality, you can choose a starting month and then the year that will be included in the naming of the fiscal year. Alternatively, you can set up a custom fiscal year, giving you more flexibility in how you define a fiscal year to be able to meet your financial planning requirements. The last setup page I will highlight within the company settings section is the language settings page. This is where we can enable different languages to be available for our users. This is not where we select the default language of the org, just which ones are available to assign to our users or for users to select. Another area of setup you should be familiar with is the user setup page. There is no point in setting up and configuring Salesforce if we don't have any users to enjoy it. If we search for users in setup and then open the page, we will see a list of users and we can create a new user. There are a lot of fields we can fill out, but only a few are required. Let me run through some of these very quickly. The email field should be a real, valid email address that the user can receive emails to. The username needs to be formatted like an email address, but doesn't have to match the email address field and does not have to be an email address you receive emails to. The reason this is important to know is because it also must be unique, meaning the same username cannot exist in any other org in any other Salesforce environment. If we scroll down, we can also add the user's time zone, locale, and language. Scrolling back up to the top, in the upper right, we need to determine the profile, the role, and the license type that this user should have. The most popular license would be Salesforce. We will talk about profiles and roles more in a few minutes, but know that these determine what the user will have permissions to do and see. The last thing I'll point out for user creation is this checkbox at the very bottom, which says generate new password and notify user immediately. So as an admin, if you uncheck this and save, then the user is not going to get notified and given access. Great, we have a user added to Salesforce, but how can we customize what they see? Let's briefly talk about the app menu, Lightning App Builder, global actions, and list views. While logged into Salesforce, a user will typically see a navigation bar across the top with different tabs they can click, and they will see a little 9-dot icon called the App Launcher. If they click on the App Launcher, they can switch between the Salesforce apps that are available to them, and they can also search for other items in Salesforce that they don't see in the navigation bar. So, as an admin, how do we configure what the user will see? We do that on the profile. If we go to Setup and search for profiles, we can view a list of existing profiles, or we can create a new profile. Every user has to be assigned a profile, which we saw earlier when we were creating a user. So maybe many users in our org are assigned this standard user profile. Well, if we want everyone who is assigned the standard user profile to only have access to the sales app and the service app, we can edit that profile, remove the other apps, and click Save. Now, those users will only have access to those two apps. Please note, a profile does way more than this. This is just one use of a profile. Staying on the same subject, we can search for App Menu within Setup and click on the App Menu Setup page to reorder the apps. This simply allows us to choose the order that the apps will be displayed in. This setup page is a part of the User Interface section in Setup. If we search User Interface, we will see all of the pages included in this section. I'd like to take a second to point out the User Interface page, which has a lot of checkboxes you may want to check out. For example, the Enable Inline Editing checkbox. I'd also like to point out the Density Settings page, which allows you to select the default density for your org, which is either comfy or compact. Compact crunches down the spacing and margin between text to fit more on the screen for your users. We also have access to the global actions and publisher pages in this section, which allows us to create and show certain quick actions available to the user. If I go back to the sales app and then click on the plus button at the top of the screen, you will see the default global actions that are available to me. Things like creating a task, creating an event, creating a lead, and so on. I can customize this list and even create my own actions. Finally, within this section in Setup, we see something called the Lightning App Builder. The Lightning App Builder helps us to create custom pages within Salesforce. We can customize the way a certain record page will look, and we can create custom home pages and choose what components will show up on it. We've customized the user interface a little bit. We've added users. What else do we need to think about when setting up Salesforce? One of the most important things that you can consider as a Salesforce admin is who should have access to which records. For example, your CEO should probably have access to more records than an intern should, and your sales team may not need to see all of the service team's records, while the service team may not need to see all of the sales team records. Or we could think about regional access. The point is, we need to determine who has access to what. The first place we need to go as an admin when determining the sharing model within Salesforce is the org-wide defaults. To get to the org-wide defaults, we need to search for sharing settings within setup. In the org-wide defaults, we will set the internal access setting for each object in Salesforce. So accounts, contacts, leads, opportunities, cases, and on and on. For each of these objects, we will set it to private, public read-only, or public read-write. There are some other values for certain objects, but we will keep this high level. If there is ever a case when a certain type of user shouldn't be able to see this type of record, you should set the org-wide default to private. So to use cases as an example, I know there are people in the org who shouldn't see every case, so I will set this to private. If every user should be able to see every case, but not every user should be able to edit every case, I will set it to public read only. And if every user should be able to view and edit in every case, we will set it to public read write. Every record in Salesforce has an owner. With this in mind, if we set cases to private, each record will only be able to be accessed by its owner. Now, after setting the org-wide defaults, we want to think about the other tools involved in the Salesforce sharing model. Org-wide defaults are where we start, and they are where we lock things down to their most restrictive state. But then we use these other tools to start to expanding record accessibility. The role hierarchy is what we should configure next. It will remind you of an org chart, but the purpose is to define how record access should be inherited in a hierarchical kind of way. After we define all of the roles and then assign roles to users, records are shared based upon the hierarchy. If someone is directly above me in the hierarchy, then they can see all of the records that I see. And whoever is above them in the hierarchy can see all of the records that both my manager can see and what I can see. Record access is inherited with the role hierarchy. That won't solve all of the record access needs though. So the next tool we would use is a sharing rule. Sharing rules are also on the sharing settings page, and they are broken out by object. So for cases, we would find the case sharing rules and then create a new one. A sharing rule allows us to extend record access by sharing based upon the record owner or based upon record criteria. For example, I could say that all closed cases should be visible to the Eastern Sales Team role. I can share to roles or public groups. Then I can determine if the access is for read-only or read and edit. Finally, if sharing rules don't solve my record access needs, I can set up manual sharing so that users can manually share records they have access to with other users, public groups, or roles. You should think about these sharing model tools in this order, starting with locking things down using org-wide defaults, then setting up role hierarchies to extend access, setting up sharing rules to automatically extend more access, and then setting up manual sharing to account for the final record access use cases. Good job, admin. You can pat yourself on the back. You've configured the UI, you've added users, you've set up record access, and you are well on your way to helping your Salesforce users thrive. Now let's talk a little bit more about profiles and permission sets. Then we will get to the bonus tip. There is way too much to unpack in our time here, but we'll run through a few of the things you should definitely know. As we've discussed, every user is assigned a profile. On the profile, we can edit all sorts of things that a set of users can have permissions to do and see. For example, the profile can determine which apps a user sees. It can determine which tabs a user can see in a navigation bar. It can determine which fields they can see or edit, and all sorts of other system permissions. The biggest thing I want to point out with profiles is that you can set object permissions here. For each object, we get to decide if we want users to be able to read, create, edit, or delete records for that object. Think of this as a step after the sharing model. For example, for all of the cases I have access to, as determined by the org-wide defaults, role hierarchy, etc., what are the permissions I should have towards those records? Should I actually be able to read them? Should I be able to edit them? What about deleting them? You can set these object permissions for each object for a specific profile, and then you can set different values for a different profile. Hopefully that makes sense. We have these different permissions and abilities that we can grant on a profile. So then, what is a permission set? Well, a permission set can be seen as another group of permissions that can be stacked on top of a profile to grant even more permissions. We can choose apps to make available to the user, we can set up object permissions, we can enable app permissions, and determine field level security on a permission set. So, if a permission set can do many of the things a profile can, what is the difference and which one should you use? Good question. Every user has to have one profile, so start there. But instead of creating a profile for every single scenario and ending up with 50 different profiles for 50 different users, create a handful of profiles with basic permission differences, and then create all of the specific scenarios with permission sets. Permission sets are additive, so if you have permission granted via permission set, but not granted on the profile, it will be granted. It is additive. And one big difference is that you can assign a user many permission sets. I want to get you the rest of the knowledge areas you need, so we will leave it there, but do some more study on this topic if needed. Finally, to round out this configuration and setup section, let's talk about security controls. As an admin, you have set up what records a user can access and what permissions they will have. But what if you want to block someone from accessing the org in the first place? What if they were just fired? Or what if they shouldn't be allowed to log in after hours? Or what if they should only be able to log in while at the office? You can make that happen. If someone should no longer be able to access Salesforce for any reason, you can deactivate the user by going to the user account and unchecking the active checkbox. If you need to do some administrative things before then, you could also choose to simply freeze the user account. If you want to limit the times people can log in, you can do that at the profile level. Go to the applicable profile and then find login hours, and then set the hour ranges users should be able to log in. Since this is on the profile, you can set different hours for different profiles if needed. If you want to limit where users can log in from, you can go to an applicable profile and then create a login IP range. Any IP addresses outside of the ranges you add here will be restricted and the user will not be able to log in. Again, this is at the profile level, so you can set different ranges for each profile, or you must set up the ranges on each profile if it should be applied to everyone. The last security control setting I will mention is the setup audit trail. If you search for it from setup, you can view a log of setup actions performed over the past months. So if you have several users with admin access, you have an audit history of who did what in setup. Alright, we've made it through section 1. Each of the rest of the sections are going to be a little bit shorter, but it's time for our bonus tip first. If a user reaches out to you because they cannot see a field on a record, there are many things you could check, but some of the first things would be ensuring that the page layout has that field added, ensuring that the page layout you are looking at is the one that aligns with the record type in question and the user's profile, and then check the user's profile to see if the field level security allows them to see the field in question. The Object Manager and Lightning App Builder knowledge area makes up 20% of the exam. You can expect about 12 questions on the exam that deal with objects and Lightning App Builder. This is tied with the configuration and setup knowledge area as the most important on the exam. First off, you should know that Salesforce is built on a relational data model. What this means is that objects can be related to each other. You may then ask, what is an object? The simplest way to describe an object in Salesforce is to think about an Excel workbook containing all of the information of a business, where you have a tab for each different type of collected information. So maybe we have a tab for people and their contact information, the contacts that our business keeps track of. Then maybe we have a tab for our products. We have a list of them and their pricing and descriptions. And then maybe we have a tab for our past and current deals or sales. And on we can go with more and more tabs. Each of these tabs would be similar to what an object represents in Salesforce. It is kind of like a category of information, a way we can create a specific type of record, like a contact. And each of these objects, such as contacts, products, and opportunities, would have fields associated with them, which are like the columns in the spreadsheet. With that in mind, going back to the first point that Salesforce is built on a relational database, this means that each object can be connected or linked together. For example, a new deal, aka an opportunity, can be related to the contact that the opportunity is associated with, and a product can be related to an opportunity so that we know what an opportunity consists of. We can visualize these objects and relationships in Salesforce by opening up the Schema Builder. In Setup, if we go to Object Manager and then Schema Builder, we can view all of the objects, both the standard ones and any custom ones that we've created. And we can see the relationships, which are represented by these lines. In this org, we have a lot of objects and relationships, but we can use the tools here to view exactly what we want to see and inspect. Honestly, I do not use this very often, but it is a nice way of visualizing the object model behind all of the records users see in Salesforce. We can even create fields on objects from the Schema Builder if we want to. So Salesforce comes with standard objects available out of the box, like contacts, accounts, opportunities, cases, and tasks, but we can also create custom objects as well, which gives us the ability to customize the Salesforce object model to match our unique business's needs. If you do this, you will likely want to relate that custom object to other objects in Salesforce. For example, if I create a property object because I am a real estate brokerage, I will probably want to connect that to a contact to represent the property owner. Thus, we need to talk about creating relationships and what types of relationships we can create. You definitely need to know about lookup relationships and master detail relationships. I'd also recommend understanding hierarchical relationships and junction objects, but that would be a longer conversation. With lookup relationships, we can add a field to an object that a user can use to find and link a record of another object. So on the property object, I could add a lookup to the contact object. Then, on a specific property record, a user can search for and select an existing contact, marking them as the property owner, and essentially linking the two records together. What you should understand here is that the lookup field can only have one record selected at a time, but on the other side of the relationship, there can be a related list of many records. For example, the property object we created can have only one property owner selected per property record, but a contact could be marked as the owner on many different property records, so it has a related list of property records. With this in mind, make sure that you add the lookup relationship field to the object that you want the user to look up one record from. You can set the lookup relationship to be required to have a value or not required. The lookup relationship should be the primary and default way you create relationships between objects in Salesforce. But sometimes you may have a case for a master detail relationship. I just want to stress that this is sometimes, but that you should default to lookup relationships. With master detail relationships, the fields look just like the lookup relationship for the user, but the master record and the relationship controls some specific behaviors of the detail records. I would describe it as a heavier, more closely connected relationship. The detail record is essentially depending upon the master record. The field is actually required to be populated. The detail records inherit security settings and permissions of the master record, and by default you cannot reparent a detail record to a different master record. One thing that master detail relationships give you is that you can use roll-up summary fields on the master record to summarize information from the related detail records. Final thing I'll mention here is that you can only use 2 master detail relationships on any given object. Actually, one more thing. You cannot make a standard object in Salesforce the detail object in the master detail relationship. The detail object is the one that you put the field on, by the way. If you were paying attention earlier, I said that we can get to the schema builder by going to the object manager in setup. So let's talk about the object manager. From the object manager, we can view all of the objects we have access to as an admin, or at least most of them. This includes both standard and custom objects. You can quickly identify each by looking at the type column or by looking at the ending of the API name for each object. If it has an __C at the end, this is a custom object. When we click on an object, we have a lot of ways we can customize that object. Again, this works and is basically the same for both standard objects and custom objects. Quickly here, we can see that we can update or create fields and relationships. We can create or edit page layouts. We can create record types, and we can, wait, what's a record type? I'm glad you asked because you need to know this for the exam too. A record type is a way we can make different types of records within a single object. For example, for the account object, we could have corporations, nonprofits, and government agencies as 3 different record types. Any corporation records we create will be in an account, and any nonprofit records we create will be in an account, but each can be treated a little bit differently when we make a record type for each of these categories. If we create these record types, a user will be able to select which record type they want to use when they create an account record. We could just create a type field on the account for this, so why would we go a little bit further and create a record type? Well, a record type would allow us to have a different page layout for each, would allow us to create different processes for each if we wanted to, which I'll get to in a second, and it would allow us to assign a different profile permission to each. For example, I could allow my corporate sales profile to only be allowed to create corporate accounts, and my nonprofit profile users to be able to create nonprofit accounts only. That is not the best example, but hopefully you get the point. As I just said, different record types can have different page layouts. We can create and edit page layouts by going to an object within the object manager. A page layout helps you to define which fields, which related lists, and which actions are available when a user opens up a record in Salesforce, generally speaking. If we edit a page layout, we will see fields, related lists, and different actions and buttons that we can configure. We can move fields around, we can remove them, or pull additional ones onto the page. We can click on the fields and make them required for this page layout. We can rearrange or add sections. The point here is we can customize what shows up on the page for a user. If we create multiple page layouts for a single object, we can go to the page layout assignments and assign the different layouts based upon profile and record type. This is a matrix that lets us show the right page layout for the right user in the right context. I've mentioned fields a few times now. We can create or edit fields from the object manager as well. When we go to create a field, we can choose from a long list of field types. You should know each of these and how they would be used. Feel free to pause and read these descriptions to review. If you create a field and then realize you should have chosen a different type, it is possible to convert your field to a new field type in some scenarios. It just depends upon the type you currently have and the type you want to change it to. For example, you can change a pick list field to most other types, but you cannot change a lookup field to anything except a master detail relationship. If you decide to delete a field, that is possible, but you cannot delete standard fields provided by Salesforce, only your custom fields. You could always remove it from the page layout if needed though. When you delete custom fields, you should recognize that you will be deleting all of the data stored in that field. That said, you can restore a deleted field and the data that was stored in that field within 15 days of when you deleted it. If you have an issue deleting a field, it is likely because that field is referenced somewhere else in Salesforce, and you will need to remove those references first. For example, if your field is referenced in custom Apex code, you won't be able to delete it. One more quick topic before the bonus tip for this section. Processes are often used on opportunities and on cases, where you have a specific set of stages that you want to progress a record through. A simple case process could be new case, working case, and closed case. This will help your service team know where any given case is in the support process and how to allocate resources. Alternatively, you could have a process that is 10 steps long. In any case, if we use record types, we could have different processes for different types of records. For example, we could have an incident case record type and a help request case record type. The processes for these will probably be different. So when we set up a process for each of these, we can define which statuses are relevant for each, and then only see those status values for those record types. Bonus time. You can use a lookup relationship to relate an object to itself. An example would be relating an account record to itself or a campaign record to itself. What I'm saying is not relating a record to itself, but an object to itself. So with the lookup being a parent record, this allows you to create a hierarchy of records. This is referred to as a self relationship. The sales and marketing applications knowledge area makes up 12% of the exam. You can expect around 7 questions on the exam that deal with sales and marketing functionality. Some of the standard objects that Salesforce provides out of the box that are relevant for sales and marketing include contacts, accounts, leads, opportunities, campaigns, products, price books, and quotes. If you are unfamiliar with any of these objects, I'd recommend that you do a little bit more studying to understand their role in the sales and marketing lifecycle. Speaking of the sales lifecycle, let's talk about the sales process in Salesforce. The sales process is where we can define the stages that are available for an opportunity. Then, when we create an opportunity record type, we can connect it to a specific sales process. And this allows us to define a different sales process for different types of opportunities. For example, going back to a real estate brokerage example, I would have a different process to close a listing deal than I would a deal to help someone find a house. Now, the path that we can see on a record is the graphical representation of the sales process. So, the stage field on an opportunity in the object manager has all of my potential stage values, regardless of record type or process. The sales process configuration helps me to define a specific set of stage values so that when a user views a record, they only have those applicable values, which I can connect to a record type. And the path allows me to create a graphical representation of the process. Make sure you know how to differentiate between all of those different things. In the sales lifecycle, before we even have an opportunity, we have a lead. And when a business generates a lot of leads, they need to determine which leads they should prioritize, which is why the concept of lead scoring exists. To create a lead score, an admin would have to use a combination of standard fields and any custom fields they want to use as inputs to a custom formula field that calculates a score, given those inputs provided. For example, I could create a formula field on the lead object that references the created date field, the industry field, and the amount field to create a unique lead score for each lead. This is a totally custom way to calculate lead scores. However, Salesforce has an add-on feature called Einstein Lead Scoring that would use AI to help generate lead scores for you, if you want to go a more high-tech route. Lead scoring would help us to know which leads to prioritize, but who should be the one following up with the lead. This is what the lead assignment rules can help with. With lead assignment rules, we can define a set of criteria based upon the lead fields, and then assign the lead to a user if that criteria is true. For example, I could say that all leads where the industry field is set to healthcare should go to Jim, and all of the leads where the industry field is set to education to go to Shane. Or we could assign them based upon geographical location. For example, if our users follow up with a lead and determine that the lead is a qualified lead, they can convert the lead into a contact, an account, and an opportunity. When the lead conversion happens, the user can select to choose an existing account or an existing contact or an existing opportunity if necessary, rather than creating new records. And they can optionally choose not to create an opportunity altogether if necessary. The campaign object in Salesforce is for tracking marketing initiatives and their results. When you spend time and effort trying to attract customers and close deals, you want to understand which efforts are paying off. With campaigns, we can create a record for each initiative, for each marketing campaign, and we can add campaign members to the campaign. These campaign member records connect leads or contacts to the campaign so that you can track who was influenced by any given marketing effort. Finally, let's talk about Einstein opportunity scoring. Again, this is an add-on feature, and like Einstein lead scoring, it leverages AI to provide a score, ranging from 1 to 99, 99 being the best. This score helps your sales team focus on the right deals, and this score can be surfaced in reports and used in workflows when desired. On the opportunity record, it can be seen in the compact layout and in the details section. Alright, bonus time. Forecasts in Salesforce help sales teams estimate future revenue. They use the opportunity records, their amounts, dates, and stages, to break down what a company may expect over a certain amount of time. An admin would need to make sure to map the proper forecast categories for each stage in the sales process to make the forecast as accurate as possible. The service and support applications knowledge area makes up 11% of the exam. You can expect around 7 questions on the exam that deal with support and service functionality. Some of the standard objects that Salesforce provides out of the box that are relevant for service and support include contacts, accounts, and cases. Cases are the primary way support teams capture a support ticket in Salesforce. Usually a support team will divvy up the open cases to support agents who manage and resolve cases as they have bandwidth. In order to assign these cases to users in Salesforce according to set criteria, an admin can configure case assignment rules. These are very similar to lead assignment rules, where you can specify criteria based upon case fields and then assign those cases to users. This can happen when a case is created matching that criteria. For example, maybe you want to assign cases of the type product malfunction to Barry, but you want to assign cases with the type question to Sandy. At many companies, it can actually be advantageous to assign a case to a queue, which is kind of like a bucket that specified users have access to. Then, when a user closes a case and has availability, they can go to cases assigned to a queue that they are a part of and grab a new case. So if we had a large support team, we could create a question case queue and a malfunctioning case queue, and then add the proper team members to each queue so that they can grab cases from their respective queue as needed. But what if it takes a while to get to a case because the backlog is so great? There are more cases than we have agents. Customers may be waiting around to hear back and get frustrated. It is a best practice to set up case auto response rules, which can be set up to email the individual who submitted the case, letting them know that their case was received, giving them a case number, and letting them know what the average time to response is. This will go a long way in helping the customer feel heard. Case auto response rules can be set up to send different email templates for different types of cases by specifying the criteria, kind of like what we did with case assignments. But what if you actually have a service level agreement with your customer? What if there are different tier plans and there is an agreement in place that you will respond to their support requests within certain timeframes? This is a good use case for case escalation rules. With escalation rules, we can specify criteria and then set up escalation actions if the case stays in the same state for a certain amount of time. This way, we can notify a manager or reassign the case to an escalation agent. It is good to have a defined process for these things to work. Speaking of processes, what is a support process in Salesforce? Similar to a sales process, a support process can define the status values that a case walks through. If you have multiple case record types, you can have a different process for each one. Then we can add a path to give a visual representation of that process. Alright, bonus time. Out of the box, cases can be created manually, but they can also be created automatically from a web form using web to case, or they can be created automatically from emails received at your support email address using email to case. The productivity and collaboration knowledge area makes up 7% of the exam. You can expect around 4 questions on the exam that deal with these topics. Activity management deals with emails, tasks, events, and logging calls. These are the 4 types of activities that you will usually be able to create on Records activity tabs. If you click on one of these buttons, you will be able to create one of these activities and enter in some more information. Activities that have been created over time on a record will be visible in the activity timeline down below, and any incomplete tasks or upcoming events will be visible up at the top of this timeline. If a user emails a contact from inside Salesforce, that email will show up in this activity timeline. Emails can also show up here if the org has some form of email logging integration set up, such as Einstein Activity Capture. Practice using these activity actions in your practice org so that you know how each one functions. The activity timeline on a record is a great way for users to be able to quickly understand the history you've had with a customer and will give additional context on what next steps should be. Keeping up with all of your tasks in Salesforce may get overwhelming at times, so it's nice to have the today's tasks and today's events on the homepage for your users. Chatter is a collaboration tool within Salesforce where users can post, comment on posts, and like posts and comments. This allows colleagues to share updates about certain work items or ask questions about the status of work items, like cases, for example. With Chatter, we can post on record feeds, we can post in Chatter groups, and we can post within the general Chatter tab feed. We can also follow records or follow users so that we can see the Chatter activity happening in our org. What makes Chatter a powerful collaboration tool is that if I get tagged in a Chatter post where someone is looking for more information, I could then tag someone else in a comment to loop them in and get their input. The ability to have collaborative conversations in an organized thread in the context of the record being discussed is often underappreciated. Salesforce App Exchange offers an extensive selection of apps, components, and other Salesforce solutions that you can add to your org to immediately add new capabilities. Some of these prepackaged solutions are free and some cost money. Some of them are created by Salesforce, but most are created by third parties. Bonus time, the App Exchange has both managed packages and unmanaged packages. The solution creator determines which way they are distributing their solution. With managed packages, you cannot view or change the solution's code or metadata, and the provider can automatically upgrade that package over time. With unmanaged packages, you can customize the code and metadata from the package, but there's no real way to upgrade that package. You would have to uninstall it and then reinstall a newer version. The data and analytics management knowledge area makes up 14% of the exam. You can expect around 8 questions on the exam that deal with these topics. Let's start with data validation. It is important to ensure that users are collecting complete and accurate information because garbage in, garbage out. If the information stored inside Salesforce is not reliable, then users will stop using it, or worse, will make mistakes because of it. We'll talk about validation rules in just a second, but first I want to communicate the importance of using the right field type. For example, if there is a data point where something should be a yes or a no, a true or a false, like whether or not a contact is deceased, you should use a checkbox. If you use a text field expecting users to write yes or no, you may end up with alternative values. Same thing with a pick list field. If you want a standardized set of values, use a pick list field where possible. The next thing we should consider is which fields to require. A user will take the path of least resistance, so if the field is not required, there's a good chance it will remain empty. But if you require too many fields, your users will just stop entering records altogether, or will enter bogus information where they are uncertain. You need to find the right balance here. Regardless, you can require a field in one of three main ways. You can edit the field and make it required always, or you can mark the field as required on a page layout so that it is required when the specific page layout is used. Or you can create a validation rule to require a field. Validation rules allow you to create a formula-like condition that will cause an error to show on the screen when it is true. So, for example, maybe we want to require the loss reason field to be populated on an opportunity record when the opportunity is updated to closed lost stage. Validation rules are great when multi-field scenarios should result in a warning to the user. As an admin, it is a good idea to report on fields from time to time to audit which fields are not getting used. Speaking of reports, let's talk about them. Creating and managing reports is a huge part of getting the full value out of Salesforce. Reports help businesses to make more informed business decisions. There are three main report formats you should be aware of. A tabular report is a standard list of records. Each row is a record, and each column is a data point or field from the record. A summary report is when we group the rows of data by one or multiple fields. For example, we can group the opportunity records by the opportunity type, summarizing the new business records and the existing business records. We can then see the summary details like the number of records in each group and the total currency amount of each group. But we can also still see all of the records as rows too if we want to. The matrix format is when we group by rows and by columns. So we could take this summary report we just created and then group the columns by the closed month so that we can see a matrix of new business and existing business summary data over a period of months. So report formats are important to know, but also important to not get confused with report types. Report types are the backbone of any report. The report type defines what objects and fields are available for a report when you create it. When you create a report, you first have to choose the report type. It could be opportunities, or it could be opportunities with products, or it could be accounts with cases. These define what is available for you to customize in the report. If you do not find a report type that works for you, you can create a custom report type, but know that you can only go 4 objects deep. So you create a report for your users, but now you need to make sure they have access to that report. How? Ensuring you have the report saved to the correct folder and that the correct users have access to that folder. If the report is saved to your private folder, only you will see it. If it is saved to the public folder, everyone can see it. But don't worry, users will still only see the data that they have access to. It is recommended that you create your own report folders and folder structure, and then share those folders with the proper users, roles, or public groups. Once you have some relevant reports created, you can use those reports as the source of dashboard components. Dashboards allow you to create at-a-glance visualizations of summarized data. For example, we can see bar charts, gauge charts, and funnel charts on our dashboard. One important note for admins here, you need to be intentional about which user the dashboard is set to run as. For any dashboard we have created, we should check this setting and consider the best option. We can run the dashboard as the user who created the dashboard, we can run it as the user who is viewing the dashboard, or we can run it as a specific user. This determines what data is used in the visualizations regardless of who opens the dashboard. So if I have a dashboard component showing the total won opportunity amount for the quarter, and I'm the admin, and I set it up to run as myself, even those users who don't have access to opportunities would see the total amount on the component if they have access to the dashboard. Finally, let's talk about importing and exporting data. There are a few ways that data can be exported from Salesforce. You can use the data export page in setup to schedule exports for backup or to run on a one-time export. You can download data from reports that you run in Salesforce, or you can use an external tool such as Data Loader to export data. To import, you can use Data Import Wizard inside of Salesforce, or you can use an external tool like Data Loader. I think it is important to point out that Data Import Wizard cannot load more than 50,000 records at a time, but Data Loader can. Also, Data Import Wizard cannot load some standard objects such as opportunities or cases. Neither Data Import Wizard or Data Export from inside Salesforce can help you to delete records either. If you want to delete records in mass, you can use a tool like Data Loader or use the Mass Delete Records page from the Salesforce setup menu. Time for a bonus tip. When choosing a source report for any dashboard component, only summary and matrix report formats will give you the most visualization options. Tabular reports only allow for lightning table visualizations. With summary, you get all of the options minus the 2 stacked bar charts. The workflow process automation knowledge area makes up 16% of the exam. You can expect around 10 questions on the exam that deal with these topics. The 4 main process automation tools that you need to be familiar with are flows, approval processes, workflow rules, and process builder processes. You should understand each of these automation tools, what their capabilities are, and under which circumstances you would use each one. Generally speaking, flows are the automation tool of the future for Salesforce professionals, and they can do more than any other automation tool. Process Builder and Workflow Rules are both being phased out, but you do still need to know about them at this point. Approval processes are the most unlike the other 3 tools because they have a very specific use case. For approvals, they allow a user to be able to submit a record for approval, which will then kick off the record to go through the approval steps that you have configured. First, there is an entry criteria that you've defined as the admin, which determines if the approval process should actually run. Then there are initial submission actions that you can configure. Then the approval steps you defined. So who is approving and how many levels of approval. Then there are approval actions or rejection actions. The initial actions, approval actions, and rejection actions that are available are record lock or unlock, tasks, email alerts, field updates, and outbound messages. Now, moving out to the other 3 automation tools, out of the 3, workflow rules are the most basic. They will only fire upon record creation or record update. You can define the object in the field criteria when the workflow rule would run, and then any actions that would occur as a result. The actions available include tasks, email alerts, field updates, or outbound messages. Essentially, the same list we had with approval processes, except that approval processes can lock the record as well. With workflow rules, we can specify that the actions should happen immediately or happen on a delay. With Process Builder, we can have an automation process run when a record is created or updated, just like workflow rules, but we could also have it start when a platform event is received or when it is invoked by another process. Another thing that Process Builder can do is that you can specify multiple sets of criteria. So if the first set is not met, the second set of criteria will be evaluated, and so on down the line. Then, for whichever is the first set of criteria that is true, those actions will run. The actions that are available for Process Builder include invoking Apex, creating a record, email alerts, invoking a flow, posting a chatter, running another process, using a quick action, leveraging Quip, sending custom notifications, submitting for approval, or updating records. You can also run these actions immediately or on a delay. I don't think you need to memorize all of these, but I do think you should know that this does everything a workflow rule can do and more, except for outbound messages. And finally, let's talk about flows. Flows will be your best friend as an admin. So after you land your admin certification, lean into learning how to build some basic flows if you haven't already. There are a lot of different types of flows, and even more are being added in future Salesforce releases, so it would be hard to cover them all here. The most popular ones I think you should know are screen flows, record-triggered flows, and scheduled flows. Screen flows can show up on a screen if you add them as a Salesforce component in a Lightning page, and they guide a user through a process on the screen. You can also start them from a button. Record-triggered flows run when a record is created or updated, and scheduled flows can be set to run on a specific schedule, such as every Monday at 9 a.m. When you create a flow, you can sometimes define entry criteria, depending upon the type of flow. For example, for a record-triggered flow, you'd want to choose the object and the field values that should exist for the flow to decide to run. Then you have all sorts of different elements that you can drag into the flow builder screen to be able to create an automation path, including logical elements like loops, assignments, and decision elements. Decision elements help you to be able to create multiple paths and multiple potential outcomes. There are tons of actions that can be performed with flows, which we will not get into here, but let it suffice to say that they can do everything and more when compared to workflow rules and process builder. Now, time for the bonus tip. If you have to select 2 automation options on the exam, there's a good chance that flows could be a good choice for one of those 2, since they can do everything that workflow rules and process builder can do. However, keep in mind that case and lead assignment rules also exist, case and lead auto response rules also exist, and case escalation rules also exist. So if those seem like a good fit, you should choose them first, because you should always go with a tool designed for a specific scenario to work in that scenario. Hopefully, all of this helps you feel better about taking the exam, or helps you to determine if this is a certification you want to study further for. As promised, I have put together study tips for you. I will reiterate what I said at the very beginning. Simply watching this video is not enough. This is a very difficult exam, and most people do not pass on their first attempt. Because there is too much content out there, and there is so much you need to know on this exam, I made a comprehensive admin exam study guide, which will help you to prepare for the exam. Click the link in the description and I will email it over to you to help you out. It includes my recommended learning materials, a free set of practice tests, and high-level term and concept overview. As for the tips for the exam, this is a tricky exam, so you want to know what to expect going in. One tip I will give you is to pick the answer that makes Salesforce look the best, when you have no idea which answer to pick. Most Salesforce training material and even the exams are also marketing pieces for Salesforce, so you can assume that the question and answers on the exam will try to make Salesforce look good. If one answer seems like a limitation and the other one seems like a boast, go with the boast. This isn't always true, but is more often than not. For all of my other admin exam tips, watch this next video on how to pass the Salesforce admin exam. It will be packed full of tips that you need to think about and be aware of as you take the exam. Thanks for spending some time with me. Please like the video, that helps me a lot, and be sure to subscribe for more content to help you on your Salesforce journey.